In 1932, Henry Ford made a decision that accidentally launched a revolution he never saw coming. He decided to put a V8 engine in a car that regular working folks could actually afford. The Ford Flathead V8 wasn't the most powerful engine or the most sophisticated, but it was something far more dangerous. It was cheap, reliable, and easy to modify. What happened next changed American car culture forever. Teenagers started stuffing these affordable V8s into lightweight Model T bodies, creating the first true hot rods. The Flathead didn't just power cars, it powered a cultural revolution that's still burning rubber today. Before 1932, the automotive world operated on a strict class system that would seem almost feudal by today's standards. If you wanted real performance, you needed serious money. V8 engines existed, but they were the exclusive domain of luxury manufacturers like Cadillac, Lincoln, and Packard. These engines powered cars that cost more than most people's annual salaries, making them as accessible as private jets are today. Working-class Americans were stuck with four-cylinder engines that wheezed out maybe 40 horsepower on a good day. The Model T, which had democratized transportation, was powered by a 20-horsepower four-banger that struggled to reach 45 miles per hour. Six-cylinder engines were considered a luxury upgrade, and even those were expensive options that many buyers couldn't afford. This created a massive performance gap in American automotive culture. Rich folks could buy fast cars, while everyone else was relegated to slow, practical transportation. There was no middle ground. No way for a regular person to experience the thrill of V8 power without winning the lottery first. The hot rod scene simply didn't exist because the fundamental ingredient was missing: affordable power. Sure, wealthy enthusiasts could afford custom race cars, but the youth culture that would define hot rodding was locked out entirely. That was all about to change in the most dramatic way possible. Henry Ford's decision to build an affordable V8 wasn't driven by performance dreams or hot rod fantasies. It was pure business strategy mixed with typical Ford stubbornness. By the late 1920s, Chevrolet was eating into Ford's market share with their smooth six-cylinder engines, making the Model T's ancient four-cylinder seem hopelessly outdated. Ford needed something dramatic to reclaim his crown. Most manufacturers would have developed a six-cylinder engine to compete with Chevy. But Henry Ford hated the idea of following anyone else's lead. Instead, he made a characteristically bold decision: skip six cylinders entirely and jump straight to eight. He wanted to leapfrog the competition with technology that would make every other affordable car seem primitive by comparison. The engineering challenge was enormous. V8 engines had traditionally required expensive, complex manufacturing processes that made them economically viable only for luxury cars. Ford's engineers had to completely reimagine V8 production, developing new casting techniques and simplified designs that could be mass-produced at Model T prices. The breakthrough came with Ford's decision to cast the entire engine block as a single piece, rather than bolting separate cylinder banks together like luxury manufacturers did. This flathead design was simpler to manufacture and much cheaper to produce, but it would prove to have performance characteristics that nobody fully understood at the time. Ford was about to unleash affordable V8 power on the masses. The Ford Flathead V8 that emerged from this development process was deceptively simple, yet revolutionary. Displacing 221 cubic inches and producing 65 horsepower, it wasn't impressive by luxury car standards, but it was absolutely earth-shattering for a $460 economy car. Suddenly, working-class buyers could afford V8 smoothness and power that had previously been reserved for the wealthy elite. The Flathead's defining characteristic was its side valve design, where the valves sat beside the cylinders rather than overhead. This created a flat cylinder head that gave the engine its nickname and made it incredibly simple to manufacture. The entire top of the engine was essentially a flat slab of iron with spark plug holes, eliminating the complex valve trains and rocker arms that made other engines expensive and complicated. But here's what made the Flathead truly special for hot rodders. It was almost ridiculously easy to work on. The simple design meant any mechanically inclined teenager could tear one apart and rebuild it in a garage with basic tools. Parts were cheap and plentiful since Ford was building hundreds of thousands of these engines. Most importantly, the The Flathead responded beautifully to modifications. The side valve design had inherent breathing limitations, but clever enthusiasts quickly discovered workarounds. Multiple carburetors, ported heads, and stroker cranks could transform a mild 65 horsepower economy engine into a 150 horsepower screamer. The Flathead was like mechanical Play-Doh in the hands of creative hot rodders. The hot rod revolution didn't happen overnight, and it didn't start where most people think. While the East Coast remained focused on traditional automotive culture, something special was brewing in Southern California during the mid-1930s. Young enthusiasts around Los Angeles discovered that cheap used Ford V8s could be transformed into legitimate speed machines with some creativity and elbow grease. The revelation was beautifully simple. Take a lightweight Model T or Model A body, drop in a Flathead V8, strip away everything unnecessary, and suddenly you had a car that could embarrass much more expensive machinery. These early hot rodders weren't trying to create a cultural movement. They just wanted to go fast on a budget. The dry lakes of Southern California became the proving grounds for these experiments. Places like Muroc Dry Lake provided miles of flat, empty space where young speed demons could test their creations without worrying about traffic or police. Weekend gatherings turned into informal racing events, and word spread quickly about which modifications actually worked. Speed shops began appearing around Los Angeles, catering to this growing community of flathead enthusiasts. Shops like Vic Edelbrock Sr. and Navarro Racing Equipment started developing specialized parts specifically for modified flatheads. These weren't factory engineers working with unlimited budgets. They were grassroots innovators, solving problems with ingenuity and determination. Most importantly, knowledge started spreading. Hot Rod magazine, founded in 1948, began documenting successful modifications and sharing techniques. The flathead community became self-teaching, with successful innovations quickly copied and improved upon by others. When World War II ended in 1945, it created the perfect storm for hot rodding to explode into mainstream American culture. Millions of young veterans returned home with mechanical skills learned in the military, steady jobs in the booming post-war economy, and a hunger for excitement after years of wartime sacrifice. The Flathead V8 was waiting for them, like automotive dynamite ready to detonate. These returning GIs had learned to work on aircraft engines, tank motors, and military vehicles under the most demanding conditions imaginable. A Ford Flathead seemed laughably simple by comparison. They could rebuild these engines blindfolded, and they had the confidence to experiment with modifications that previous generations would never have attempted. Surplus military equipment flooded the market, providing cheap sources for performance parts and tools. The economic boom meant working-class kids suddenly had disposable income for the first time in decades. A used Flathead-powered Ford could be bought for under $100, and with some weekend wrenching, it could be transformed into something that would outrun cars costing 10 times as much. Hot rodding became the ultimate expression of American ingenuity and democratic access to performance. But the Flathead hot rod revolution was about more than just speed. These cars became symbols of youth rebellion and independence. Parents who had survived the Depression couldn't understand why their kids wanted to tear apart perfectly good cars to make them louder and faster. Hot rods represented a generational divide, with flatheads as the soundtrack of teenage defiance. Hollywood took notice, and hot rods began appearing in movies and popular culture. The Flathead's distinctive sound became synonymous with youth culture, rebellion, and the pursuit of speed on America's growing highway system. The Ford Flathead V8 didn't just create hot rodding, it fundamentally transformed the entire American automotive landscape in ways that are still felt today. By proving that regular people could build fast cars in their garages, the Flathead forced the entire industry to rethink their approach to performance and youth markets. Detroit manufacturers initially dismissed hot rodding as a dangerous fad, but they couldn't ignore the sales numbers. Young buyers who had learned to modify flatheads became sophisticated consumers who demanded more performance from factory cars. This pressure led directly to the development of the muscle car era, as manufacturers realized they needed to offer factory performance to compete with home-built hot rods. The aftermarket performance industry was essentially born from flathead modifications. Companies like Edelbrock, Iskandarian, and Moon Equipment started as garage operations serving hot rodders, then grew into major suppliers for the entire automotive industry. The concept of bolt-on performance parts, now a multi-billion-dollar industry, traces directly back to flathead speed equipment. Perhaps most importantly, the Flathead democratized automotive enthusiasm in America. Before 1932, car culture was largely the domain of wealthy enthusiasts who could afford expensive machinery. The Flathead proved that passion and creativity mattered more than money, establishing the foundation for American hot rod culture that values ingenuity over luxury. The Flathead also created the template for automotive media and community building. Hot rod magazines, speed shops, and racing events all evolved from the Flathead scene. Even modern car shows and online forums follow organizational patterns established by early Flathead enthusiasts who needed ways to share knowledge and showcase their creations. The Ford Flathead's reign as the king of hot rodding didn't end with a bang, but with a whimper that stretched across the 1950s. The same side valve design that made flatheads so accessible and easy to modify eventually became their fatal limitation. As hot rodders pushed these engines harder and demanded more power, the flathead's fundamental breathing restrictions became impossible to overcome. The death blow came in 1955 when Chevrolet introduced their small block V8 with overhead valves. The new Chevy 265 produced more power in stock form than most modified flatheads, and it had virtually unlimited modification potential. Suddenly, the Flathead looked ancient and inefficient by comparison. Ford's own overhead valve Y-block, introduced in 1954, was faster than their Flathead, but the damage was done. Hot rodders are notoriously disloyal when something better comes along, and the writing was on the wall. The overhead valve revolution offered more power, better fuel economy, and superior breathing characteristics that made the Flathead's side valve design seem hopelessly outdated. By the late 1950s, serious hot rodders were yanking Flatheads out of their cars and replacing them with modern V8s. The final nail in the coffin was the muscle car era of the 1960s. When manufacturers started building factory cars with 400-plus horsepower engines, the Flathead's modest output seemed quaint rather than revolutionary. The same working-class buyers who had once built Flathead hot rods could now buy factory performance that exceeded anything possible with side valve technology. By 1970, Flatheads had largely disappeared from active hot rod use, relegated to nostalgic builds and historical preservation projects. The Ford Flathead V8 didn't just power cars, it powered dreams. It proved that speed didn't require wealth, just creativity and determination. Though overhead valve engines eventually made it obsolete, the Flathead's legacy lives on in every garage-built hot rod and backyard speed shop. It taught America that performance belongs to everyone, not just the privileged few. Hit subscribe for more automotive revolution stories.